Most people said they've heard the term sexual selection, but not really sure what it means, and that's exactly what I expected, right? A lot of the time, a lot of people come across sexual selection without actually knowing what they're looking at. And most of these are during the nature documentaries, which most people have said that they've at least watched them, and they really enjoy them, which is really good. Um, and then I asked if anyone's noticed any mating displays when they watch these documentaries, and majority of people said yes, some maybe, a couple no. And some really good examples that you guys have put up are peacocks. That's like the classic example of sexual selection, with the display of the feathers, sound, all really, really good examples of mating displays. And this is what we call sexually selected signals. So that's a really good place to start. And hopefully we'll just keep building on that as we go on. So all of these are examples of how individuals actually choose a mate. But why does mate choice actually matter? So why don't these females just pick anyone to mate with and then just go from there? So at first glance, it's very easy to assume that evolution favors the best individuals. So this could be those that are the most physically strong or have the biggest cognitive abilities. Maybe they're the most efficient at finding food or defending their resources like territory and offspring. But while these traits can increase an individual's chance of surviving, evolutionary success is not defined by survival alone. So in evolutionary terms, success is measured by the ability to pass on your genes to future generations. So if an individual never reproduces, its traits, which are determined by its genes, regardless of how advantageous they may be for survival, are not passed on at all. And as a result, mate choice plays a very crucial role in determining which individuals will contribute genetically to the next generation. So when individuals preferentially choose certain mates, some individuals will reproduce more than others, and those individuals will pass on a greater proportion of their genes over to the next generation. And over many generations cumulatively, these traits that are associated with mating success will become a lot more common in the population. So it's really important when it comes to mate choice to think about the benefits and the costs that these have. So choosing a high quality mate can provide a lot of benefits, like producing offspring that are healthier, maybe stronger, more likely to survive, maybe more likely to reproduce themselves. But it also comes with associated costs, like a very heavy energy investment. So all sexually selected signals and all mate choice is very energy intensive. And it takes away energy from survival related activities like foraging or defense. So overall, mate choice matters because it determines which individuals are able to reproduce and pass on their genes to the next generation. So a big part in trying to understand this, we need to go all the way back to 1859 to Charles Darwin, which I'm sure you guys have heard of before, definitely if you did GCSE biology, and hopefully if you do biology now or on the documentaries you've watched, you would have heard of Darwin. And essentially, Darwin developed his ideas about evolution through long-term observation in the wild. So he traveled the world, and he's most famous for his observation of his finches in the Galapagos Island. So during his travel, particularly on the voyage of the HMS Beagle, which is the ship he used to travel around the world, he noticed two consistent patterns. So the first one is that individuals within a species vary. And the second is that those variations often appear very well suited to the environments in which the organisms live. So Darwin wanted to explain how these small differences could lead to populations changing over time, and this led him to the idea that we now call natural selection. So his key insight was that the environment acts as a filter on variation. So individuals will differ in traits such as size, color, or behavior, and the environmental factors, which are collectively known as the selection pressures, like predators, climate, and food availability will all influence which individuals are able to survive more successfully. So those that can survive longer are more likely to reproduce, meaning that their traits are passed on to the next generations. And over many generations, this process can lead to populations becoming better adapted to their environments. And under natural selection, being better at surviving usually results in leaving more offspring. However, Darwin also recognized a major problem with his own explanation. So many species possess traits that appear to reduce survival rather than improve it. So bright colors, large ornamental structures like the peacock feathers that were mentioned before, and antlers on deer, these are all very conspicuous and they require a lot of energy to produce and also to maintain. Now, this energy can take away from survival because instead of investing energy in looking for food or looking for a safe place for territory, XYZ, this energy is now going to these very extravagant displays. So if natural selection favors traits that improve survival, these features should actually be selected against it. And this was Darwin's big problem. So why do traits that reduce survival persist in populations? It just didn't make sense to him, and this is like a big reason why sexual selection is such a big part of evolutionary biology. So the solution now is to recognize that evolution is shaped by trade-offs between survival and reproduction, not just survival and not just reproduction. So while some traits decrease in individual's chances of surviving, they can substantially increase mating success. So if a trait allows an individual to reproduce more, then the genes underlying that trait can still spread through the population, even if the trait carries a survival costs. So the key conclusion here is that evolution is not driven by survival alone, not driven by reproduction alone, but a trade-off between the two. And evolution is shaped by trade-offs between surviving long enough to reproduce, but then also reproducing successfully enough for these traits and their genes to be passed on to the next generation. So that's enough like history. So now we're going to go on to more of those sexually selected traits that you noticed in those nature documentaries. And the first thing we're going to talk about are visual signals. So visual signals are traits or behaviors that can be seen by the potential mate. So these signals include features such as color, shape, size, movement, and they play a major role in mate choice across many species. And when most people think of sexual selection, these are the first types of signals, or the most common signals that you would think of. So if you think of birds, it's the males with the very elaborate tails or very beautiful, colorful feathers. Male deer with the beautiful antlers, very big. Those are classic examples of visual sexually selected signals. So these signals are often very highly exaggerated because individuals are competing for attention. So in environments where many individuals are present, subtle traits are less likely to be noticed. So selection can favor signals that are brighter, larger, or more dramatic. And as a result, visual signals become more extreme over time, even when they are costly to produce or maintain. So these exaggerated traits are not necessarily beneficial for survival, but they can be very effective at increasing mating success, so helping to pass on your genes. So a very clear example of a visual sexual signal is a courtship display, which is known as like a dance that some males do to attract a female. And my favorite example is with peacock spiders, which are really tiny, but they're beautiful. They have loads of these very extravagant colors, and they all have a very specific dance that they use to attract a mate. So as you watch this, I want you to focus on what kind of features are being made noticeable and how the movement contributes to the signal to attract the female. Let me just get it to the right time.
To divert her attention, all else in the garden. Eyes locked, The enchantment begins. She appraises the dance in all its colorful splendor as his routine becomes increasingly vigorous. But her head is easily turned.
So hopefully there you could see the part that the colors of this male's body displays, and also how the movements create some kind of like illusion for this female to be attracted and for her to pay attention to his mating display. So just to summarize with the visual signals, why do you think visual signals are so extreme? And it seems that most people have got the idea. So visual signals are very extreme because they're there to increase detectability by mates. They're essentially saying, hey, I'm here, look at me, I'm an option for you to mate with. Okay, so the second type of signal that we're going to go through are auditory signals. And these are traits or behaviors that can be heard by potential mates. So these include calls, songs, or other sounds produced during courtship, and they're very effective because sound can travel over very long distances or around obstacles. So this makes auditory signals very useful in environments where visual contact is very limited, such as dense vegetation, low light conditions, or anything like that. So if we think about the dense canopy forests, this is why birdsong is so important, because they don't get to see each other very often, so they rely on auditory signals instead. But because sound spreads very widely, auditory signals are often very conspicuous, and they're not only heard by potential mates, but also by predators and competitors. So producing loud and frequent calls can carry a very significant survival cost, especially if it's heard by a predator. But despite this, these auditory signals persist because they can greatly increase mating success, and they allow individuals to produce them to pass on their genes, even though the behavior is very risky. So at the end of the day, as long as those genes have been passed on, it's a success in terms of evolution. So an example of this is one of my favorite birds, which is the black-bellied curran, or I think it now might have been changed to the red-crested curran, something like that. But in South Africa, it's known as a kamikaze chicken. And it's basically because of the way that it displays. It's got a very elaborate display. And I'm just going to show you just the song, but later on, if you go on and see and search the whole display, it's a very interesting thing to watch. But just pay attention to how much effort it's putting in to this call and how detailed it is as well. What do you think is the biggest danger to this male of sending out such a loud and elaborate signal? So whilst being heard by other males might be dangerous in terms of whether or not he might be the successful male, the main risk is that he's heard by a predator, which, as you can see, is pretty likely and is pretty exposed if he is. So sexually selected signals are very costly and very dangerous business. So the last type of sexually selected signal that we're going to go through is our chemical signals. So these are traits or behaviors that can be detected through chemicals, which are often referred to as pheromones. And these pheromones are chemicals that contain a large amount of information about an individual, including its species, its sex, its reproductive status, its health, its genetic compatibility with the individual. So they're very complex signals. They're not only made up of one chemical, so pheromones are made up of very many different chemicals that all have different roles. And they're all received in different ways. So chemical signals can be received through smell, but also through taste as well. So in many species, particularly insects, reptiles, stuff like that, chemical cues are the primary way that mates are located and identified. So these chemical signals are able to persist in the environment over time, so individuals can constantly be able to smell them, allowing individuals to communicate even when they're not physically present. And this is a really big advantage of using pheromones. The disadvantage of using pheromones, though, is that they can be quite slow to disperse, and they are very heavily influenced by the environmental factors around them, like wind, temperature, rain. All of that kind of stuff can obscure the message that's being sent by pheromones. But despite these limitations, chemical signals are extremely effective in many species, and they play a very central role in mate choice. And like any other sexually selected signal, they persist because they increase the likelihood of successful mating. So I don't have a video or anything like that because it's very hard to explain that, to explain pheromones in terms of videos. We can't really smell things through a screen, unfortunately. But a classic example is, like I said, with insects, if we take these moths as an example. So the female moth is going to send out pheromones into the environment, and this is to allow male moths to locate her. Male moths will also send out pheromones into the environment to allow the female to decide if she wants to mate with him or not. And this will give the female a lot of information about the condition of the male, whether what's his reproductive status, is he healthy, and stuff like that. So it's a very informative cue for females and males to also decide whether or not to mate with that individual. So based on this, I'd like to know what you think is a key feature of pheromones. So they're species specific and allows the individuals to find each other regardless of what else is around, which is really great. Okay, so I've only gone through 3 different types of signals, but there are so many more. So this is really only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to sexually selected signals. But of the 3 that we've gone through so far, what do you think is the most important? Great. So most of you have the right idea where it's all of them combined. Okay. So although an individual signal can provide very useful information, mate choice is very rarely based on a single cue. So anytime you yourself make a decision, you usually don't base that decision just on one thing, you base it on many different things, especially if it's an important decision. So individuals will typically assess a combination of signals when making mating decisions. So visual, auditory, and chemical cues are just some of the cues that work together and each contribute different information about a potential mate in order to allow an individual to decide yes or no. So using multiple signals can increase the accuracy of mate choice, and this is really important. So if one signal is unreliable due to environmental conditions, for example, like low visibility or a lot of background noise or anything like that, other signals are still able to provide the individual with a good idea of whether or not that mate is a suitable partner. Furthermore, different signals may also convey different aspects of mate quality. So some of these signals might tell the individual, this individual is more dominant. This mate could be a lot healthier. This one could be stronger. So by putting all of these together, individuals can reduce the risk of making a poor mating decision. So as a result, there's not really a best signal. It kind of just depends on the environment and the species that you're looking at. So as a good example of this, we're going to take it back to basically what I do on a day-to-day basis. So my research is all with Drosophila. I use a different species to these, but it's pretty much the same idea. And all of the questions that I ask are using these fruit flies. So in this video, we're going to see the Drosophila courtship display, which combines all of the signals that we've been looking at today and a few more. So Drosophila let out pheromones that can be detected through smell and taste. Obviously, we can't see that in the video. They also sing a song, which we can't hear in the video, but it is happening the whole time. And then you'll see the visual and the visual displays that the male does. And as he does these visual displays, it also creates vibrations, which the female can detect, and she uses all of this information combined to decide if she wants to mate with this male or not. So in this video, the one on the left right now is the female because she has a white bum, and then the one on the right now is the male because he has a black bum. But just watch and you'll try to pay attention to all of these signals combined. So the one at the top right now is the female. So he'll be singing right now. As he moves, he creates vibrations, and then the visual aspect is from the wing flickers as well. So I mentioned the word honest earlier, but I didn't really go into too much detail about it. So many sexually selected signals are considered honest because they're very costly to produce and also to maintain. So the key idea is that these costs make cheating or faking the signal or faking your own quality very difficult. So if a signal requires a very large amount of energy, as they all do, precise coordination, or if it depends directly on an individual's physical condition, like their health, for example, or whether or not they've been eating enough, then only individuals in a very good condition are able to produce these signals effectively. As a result, what this means is that the signal provides a reliable source of information to the potential mates on the quality of the individual. So, for example, producing very bright colored feathers or very loud calls or complex pheromones, this will require a lot of energy investment. And individuals that are in poor condition, so let's say, for example, they're ill or they've not been eating enough, they won't actually be able to sustain these signals at the same intensity or even same frequency as before. And this gives a lot of information to the female on the condition of that male. So in this way, the cost of the signal is basically what maintains its honesty. So if cheating the signal or creating a false idea of the quality of the individual was cheap, then these dishonest signals would be very quickly spread throughout the population and mate choice wouldn't really work. And this is also important to think about where these signals are not given off just for 5 seconds or just for a day. This often happens over the whole breeding season, which can last a few days, it can last a few weeks, and sometimes even a few months. So these signals are constantly being produced. So in order to have the energy to be able to constantly produce these, you have to be in good condition as well. Okay, so I think that's enough for the frogs in theory, and we can get down to the actual kind of main part of the talk. So up until this point, we've been talking about how animals use signals and information to make different decisions. We've seen that mate choice is very rarely based on a single cue, and that individuals can integrate multiple signals when assessing potential partners. So now it's time for you to be in those shoes and for you to experience sexual selection directly. So the activity that we're about to do together is based on my master's thesis, which was all about house sparrows and their mating systems. And I've adapted this activity from another public engagement event that I did. But that was in person, so these polls are a whole new thing. So hopefully they work. But essentially what we're going to do is use sparrow mating systems to simulate kind of sexual selection and choosing which mate, balancing the benefits and costs of each partner. So for a bit of background, house sparrows are socially monogamous but genetically polygamous. What that means is they mate for life with one specific partner, but in order to try get a few more offspring that may be of better genetic quality, the females will often run off and sneakily cheat on their partner with another male. So in these sparrows, mate choice can be influenced by things like nest quality, parental care, and an individual's ability to provide food or even defend their offspring. So some individuals may invest more in building a nest, others may invest more in foraging and bringing food to the chicks. Others might just live for a very long time. So all of these have specific benefits and costs to the female. This is what the female is looking at. So this is definitely a game that you've played before, but in a very different context, I'm very sure. But we're going to play Kiss, Marry, Avoid, but Sparrow Edition. So how this is going to work is your job is you are going to act as the female sparrow, and you are going to be presented with 3 different males. And what you need to decide is which sparrow you are going to mate for life with. So that's the one you're going to marry. Which one you are going to go cheat on your partner with, which is the one you're going to kiss, and which one you are going to avoid. Now, throughout this whole time, what I want you to think about are the benefits and the costs of each mate, so that we can keep thinking about why mate choice matters, and keep thinking about what's going to allow me to pass on my genes the most. Okay? So let's meet the contenders. So the first one is Sparrow A, and he's known as the builder. So the builder builds very strong nests. He protects his eggs very well, but he very rarely leaves the nest to forage, so there's very limited food. Sparrow B is the provider, and he builds very simple nests, but he brings lots of food. But the nest is often unattended, so there's not a lot of protection or defense. And Sparrow C is the healthy one. So he has an average nest. He brings some food to the nest, but he lives a very long time. So he may be able to reproduce across very multiple seasons. So I am going to put up some polls, and what I want you to do is let me know which sparrow you would kiss, which sparrow you would marry, and which sparrow you would avoid. Okay, so far we've got a bit of a battle between the healthy one and the builder of who you would kiss and marry. So the healthy one we both want to kiss and marry. And the provider is the one that collectively everyone is avoiding. So that's quite interesting, and it would make sense that you would want to marry the healthy one, because you're kind of guaranteed a long lifespan, and hopefully you're able to reproduce over many seasons to build the number of offspring that you get over time. The provider, nest unattended, that's a good one to avoid. And the builder, yeah, I think those are all really wise choices. That was a good outcome for the first one. Okay, so now we're going to keep those 3 choices. You still presented with the same 3 sparrows. You're the same female, but now the conditions have changed. So what happens now if the environment has changed and food has become scarce? So the lack of food is now a selection pressure, and basically, would you make the same choices under these conditions? So I'm going to set up a new poll, and we're going to see, would you still kiss, marry, and avoid the same sparrow, or would it change? Okay, so far, I can see that under different conditions, our choices have completely changed, which is completely what we expect, right? So now the popular sparrow to marry is the provider, which makes sense because he's the one that brings a lot of food. So he puts a lot of effort into foraging, which under these conditions is really, really beneficial. So that was a really good choice. The one that everyone would go kiss would be the healthy one. Yeah, good choice. And then the builder in this kind of situation is definitely the one to avoid. Yeah, really good. So a key thing that I want you to realize here is obviously the environment has changed. the choices and what you think would be the best or most responsible choice has now changed as well. So we'll change the environment one more time. And now I want you to think what would happen if the breeding season gets a lot shorter. So we've got a new selection pressure now. The breeding season is significantly shorter. Would you still pick the same sparrow? Okay, so far, the results of this one look a lot more similar to the first one. Kind of a combination, actually. So the one that we would all marry is definitely the healthy one again. That's the popular one. The builder is one we're going to go kiss, and then the provider would be the one to avoid, which would make sense under these conditions. So the key take home from all of these is that under each condition, they're always going to change. So we always take in the same signals, but how those signals are perceived, what you do with that information, the relative costs and benefits and those trade-offs, they change in every single environment. And this can change day to day, month to month as well. It's all completely dynamic. So hopefully you enjoyed that. So over the course of this talk, we've looked at how animals use signals to attract mates, how those signals can be costly, and how individuals integrate multiple cues when making mating decisions. We've also seen through the sparrow activity that there's no single best strategy. It's all very much dependent on the environment and what kind of selection pressures you're facing at the time. So what links all of these examples together is the same underlying process, that mate choice affects who reproduces and who gets to pass on those genes. So when some individuals reproduce more than others, their traits are passed on more frequently, and over generations, this leads to evolutionary change. So that means that sexual selection is not separate from evolution, but it's one of the mechanisms that evolution actually happens. So sexual selection will favor traits that do not improve survival necessarily. They might actually even reduce the chances of survival, but they continue to persist because of their reproductive benefits. So evolution is therefore shaped by trade-offs between survival and reproduction rather than just by survival alone. So just to summarize, I'm going to ask you a couple more questions, and then we will call it a day. So the first one is, which of these do you think is most directly linked to evolutionary success? Okay, so for some reason it says physical strength is the right answer, but it should be passing on genes, which all of you got, which is really good. So in the context of this and evolutionary success, now, when is sexual selection most likely to strongly shape traits? The correct answer is all of the above. And that's because sexual selection becomes kind of partially important when not everyone gets the same chance to mate. Not partially, sorry, particularly important when not everyone gets the chance to mate, and when individuals actively choose between potential partners. So in these situations, very small differences in traits can have very large effects on reproductive success, even if those traits don't improve survival. So this explains why sexual selection can produce such exaggerated, diverse, and sometimes even puzzling traits across the natural world. So hopefully we can now answer this one a little bit better than the previous time. How do you now feel about sexual selection? So a lot of people saying it's more interesting than I expected, which makes me very happy. I'm a bit biased, but that makes me happy. More complex than I thought. It's definitely the tip of the iceberg that I've showed you today, and I want to learn more. So I'm going to take that as I've done my job successfully. So if there's just one key message that I want you to take away from today, it's that evolution is not only about surviving, but it's about reproducing and the balance between the survival and reproduction. So it matters because it determines who gets to pass on their genes, and that shapes behavior, traits, and evolutionary trajectories over time. So if hopefully, like I can see from the poll, you liked anything that we talked about and it sparked your interest, there's lots of great resources out there to explore this further. So the top two on this screen are videos. The left is like this whole series on insect courtship, was super interesting. The one on the right is the science of attraction in humans, which is also very interesting. And the bottom are books and podcasts that are really good. But I'm also happy to recommend some more specific stuff. If you're more interested, just let me know.